One of the most iconic and classic JRPGs ever made, Final Fantasy IV. Or Final Fantasy II if you want to get Murica about it. Released in 1991, it was the series' first entry in the 16-bit era, sporting a fantastic story, phenomenal music, and implemented the active time battle system for the first time in the series. Final Fantasy games themselves usually move on to the next numbered entry, and while they have similar themes, such as chocobos, summons like Bahamut and Ifrit, they usually move into a whole different world with a different cast and storyline. They usually have different battle mechanics as well. This continued to be the case with Final Fantasy V and beyond. The exception, though, was Final Fantasy X-2, released in 2003 as an actual direct sequel to Final Fantasy X, also released 2 years earlier. This entry took place in the same world, albeit 2 years later with a revamped battle system using something called dress spheres. This entry has been known to be divisive. I've heard people criticize the overly peppy or poppy sound and feel of the game as well as the confusing storyline. I've also heard others happy with the conclusion of the story and overall battle system and gameplay. This sequel, though, really opened the floodgates for Square Enix, as they proceeded to create more and more sequels to many of their other of the numbered entries, and this includes the Final Fantasy VII Advent Children movie, Dirge of Cerberus game, Final Fantasy XIII-2 and XIII-3, and of course, Final Fantasy IV The After Years. The first iteration of The After Years was released in 2008, 17 years after the original release of Final Fantasy IV. The game itself takes place in the world exactly 17 years after the events of the original game too, and this was an evident choice by the developers to show their world in the same amount of time that had gone by for players. This first iteration of After Years, that released in 2008, was for Japanese mobile phones only, and because of this, it was in an episodic format. Even the game in its final forms for consoles kept this episodic format, and this game didn't release in North America until June 1st, 2009 for the Wii's WiiWare service, and it came out in chapters up through September 7th, releasing weekly. It was later compiled and released as the Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection for the PSP on April 19th, 2011. This version is what you're going to be seeing in this video here today, as I believe it is the definitive version. There was also a 3D remake released for mobile iOS on November 25th, 2013, but it looked like it was hurried along and it doesn't feature a number of things the original WiiWare and PSP versions have. Because these versions are the best ones, with the PSP one being definitive, it's these that I'm going to focus on. The 3D remake version was ported to Windows on May 11th, 2015. Do note that the spoiler warning is now in effect, as from here on out I'll be going into comprehensive detail about the game, including the overall plot. As mentioned earlier, the story takes place 17 years after the events of the original title. We're introduced to Theodore, the 16-year-old son of Cecil and Rosa, the heroes from the original title, and now the King and Queen of Baron, while out on a mission to join the Red Wings with Baron soldiers Biggs and Wedge, who were retconned as the nameless soldiers questioning the Red Wings' motives in the beginning of the original entry. The catalyst of the story takes place. A mysterious girl, that's literally what she's named as, up until later in the game, invades Baron Castle. Cecil, Rosa, and Cid work to fight the invading monsters. However, seeing an inevitable defeat, Cecil stays behind so Rosa and Cid can escape. This mysterious girl comes in with Bahamut, obviously under her control, and defeats Cecil, and also seals Baron Castle. Theodore, while trying to pass a test to become a full-fledged member of the Red Wings, gets attacked. Biggs and Wedge sacrifice themselves so that he can escape and return to Baron, and he's aided by a mysterious hooded man who has a vendetta against Kain, and they both set on their journey to Baron. And from here, each of the characters from Final Fantasy IV have their own story that takes place in their own respective episodes. And oftentimes, each of these characters get joined by either a known or obscure character from the original entry, or a wholly new one. All of these stories, upon completion, lead to the next part of the story, Once they're all done, it becomes Kane's story. And this involves the hooded man being revealed as a split portion of Kane, divided due to Kane's darker tendencies and desires, up to and including coveting Rosa. This leads to a head where Kane's darker self kidnaps Rosa and brings her back to Baron. The hooded man confronts the darker Kane, defeats him, and merges with him to become a holy dragoon. Now joined by the complete Kane, Theodore, Rosa, and Sid seek to confront Cecil unobtrusively sitting on his throne in Baron with the mysterious girl at his side. While confronting him, though, during the Gathering's Tale, Rydia and Edge, joined by Golbez, who he escaped the moon thanks to Fu Soya's help, worked together to gather all of their allies as well as wake up Rydia's summons, wreaking havoc around the blue planet. Just like Bahamut, the mysterious girl has taken control of all of them. Once they quell these issues, they join the group at Baron and manage to rescue Cecil. Theodore then also joins Rydia's group and defeats the mysterious girl. Unfortunately, said girl is revealed to have multiple copies of herself and goad the party to join them on the True Moon, the other of the two moons that their blue planet has. Once they use the lunar whale to reach this moon, accessible thanks to Golbez, they descend the inner labyrinth. During the descent down to this area, Rydia has the opportunity to recover summons Ashura and Leviathan, as well as Golbez having dialogue with the former four fiends. They eventually encounter a Dark Knight version of Cecil, and there are a few outcomes upon meeting this doppelganger, depending on the party the player has. One is they immediately get wiped and game over. Another is that Golbez dies and sacrifices himself if just he, as well as a number of others, are in the party. But the canon version is, if the player has Golbez, Cecil, Theodore, and Rosa, the player can progress. Golbez lives, and Cecil gains his full strength back. The party then descends further and encounters the mysterious girls, now named Maenads, which were mass-made by an entity known as the Creator. And you get major Final Fantasy Legends 1 vibes if you've managed to finish that game on the Game Boy. The Creator seeks to destroy any life forms it has deemed evolutionary fails, hence why it wants to destroy Cecil's world. And it's been working to do this by having the True Moon steadily approach the blue planet and devour it. The party engages and successfully defeats the Creator and escapes with a child version of the Maenad. The conclusion of the game is yet another big happy ending. Rydia will raise the Maenad child, now named Kuore, with Edge's help. Kane is now the captain of the Red Wings with Theodore as his number 2, and Cecil and Rosa are back on the throne. And all the other characters that appeared at the end of the game see their own variation of the good old big happy. All 22 of them. Yes, After Years beats out Final Fantasy VI's total playable characters at the endgame by 8. And this doesn't count the total playable characters overall in the course of the episodic story. This leads into what is by far the absolute biggest weakness of the game, the deluge of characters it has in it that are playable. Not only are the introduction of all these all often too confusing, many of them are pointless, especially at the end of the game. Some of them have some pretty cool bands they can form, more on bands later, but many of them are just quite unnecessary. And while I enjoyed seeing what each of these characters were up to 17 years later, many of the individual character beats see a ton of the supporting characters retread too many of the same paths the original Final Fantasy IV set out on. Like, seriously, did we need to fight the Octomammoth in 3 different variations in this game? All of the other bosses were literally pulled from the original entry, especially on the True Moon. Ultimately, the story beats retread nostalgia and member berries way too much, while also making a number of indirect to very direct allusions to other Final Fantasy games in the series. This latter point occurs with the portion of the story where Rydia and Edge gather their allies, very reminiscent to Final Fantasy VI's Searching for Friends, up to and including the sky and ocean on the world map, looking much like the 6th entry at that portion of its story. Another reference to other entries are the bosses fought in the lunar depths up to and including Orthros from the 6th entry and the venerable and hilarious Gilgamesh from the 5th. I actually found these boss fights to be a lot of fun, as many of these also doubled as super bosses. Much like how Shinryu and Omega Weapon were from the 5th entry, they also appeared this way in after years. Unfortunately though, the 3D remake cut out all of these additional Final Fantasy bosses, further making this a more drab and boring entry out of all the versions. As mentioned earlier, I loved hearing the 4 fiends recognizing and thanking Golbez for his support after the party battles them yet again on the True Moon. And one of these fights is actually quite amazing, as Edge is given the option to fight Rubicante mano a mano. If successful, we see Edge vindicated from the first battle we saw him in the original entry. You know, the one where he idiotically uses flame ninjutsu on the fire elemental fiend. One cool aspect I actually liked with the game was the moon phases, where every stay in and in, tent use, or 30 minutes of real time goes by, it changes the moon phase. This results in different monsters appearing in certain parts of the map and dungeons, depending on the episode or story. More importantly, it increases or decreases aspects such as attacks, skills, white, and black magic. This results in potential for more strategic party selection. Even with the moon phase system, the battle system is exactly the same as the original entry, though there is another addition, and by far the best aspect of the game: the band system. These essentially work like Chrono Trigger's double or triple techniques, though up to and including 5 characters that are in the party can participate in a band. They are triggered if the player selects Search for Band for a character and then select the appropriate commands that will execute said band. For example, Cecil and Rosa can execute Holy Blade, costing both 15 magic points, but it pulls off a Holy Elemental attack almost twice as much and as powerful as what Cecil could do on his own with the attack command. And some of these are really strong, with the ability to break the damage limit, such as the band Final Fantasy. If all 5 original characters that defeated Zeramus in the original entry execute this, it restores major hit points for all party members, casts Protect and Shell on them all, and damages one single enemy beyond the damage limit. One nice thing with bands is that once you execute it once, you can actually select it at any time in battle as long as you have the characters there to execute them. So that's some of the negative and positive and a whole lot of mid. What can be done to improve this game? What would make Final Fantasy IV The After Years more palatable and a lot more fun? The first step would be to re-release the game in the pixel remaster style that the original 4th entry got released in, and of course release it for both major consoles and PC Steam. One important aspect with this pixel remaster would be to not implement all the changes made when After Years got ported as a 3D remake. Some of these I should mention were good, such as the removal of the level limit in each of the individual episodes. Instead of keeping Theodore and his party at level 50 like all original versions, the 3D remake got rid of this. That's cool, but I hated how they got rid of all the bosses from the other Final Fantasy games in the Lunar Depths, like I mentioned. They also really dumbed them down there too. And honestly, I disliked all of the overall aesthetics of these 3D remakes anyway. It's like a marriage of the chibi style of the original games, with the 3D models just look way too blocky to me. Another important change is to just eliminate the episodic format completely. Not only would this result in one straight, cohesive story, it would also save on the saves. Because every one of the 9+ episodes has its own unique save file, and each episode has its own series of inventory to manage, such as equipment and items like potions. That alone is a logistical nightmare that's easily rectified by eliminating these episodes. Essentially, I'd see the game starting from Theodore's Tale, then right into Kane's, and while these 2 stories are going, there would be a meanwhile akin to the original entry, showing what's going on, where it would show what Golbez is doing, as well as what Rydia and Kane are up to when the latter is not in Theodore's party. From there, the game goes to the Gathering episode, which is of course Rydia and Edge's story. And funny enough, After Years originally interspersed scenes of what's going on at Baron Castle between Cecil and Theodore's party whenever Rydia and Edge would complete certain parts of their quest in said Gathering episode. From there, the next section moves seamlessly into the True Moon section of its exploration of the Lunar Depths, up until the end of the story. One important thing to note is that with the elimination of the episodic format, we're losing information on what secondary characters like Yang, Edward, and Palom and Porm are doing. And honestly, this isn't a big loss at all. They were temporary characters in the original entry to Cecil's story, and they don't have a large role in the story overall with After Years. With their episodes being removed, that means they and their supporting characters of Ursula, Harley, Leonora, and the like are gone. And let's remove Edge's 4 ninja apprentices and Rydia's dolls while we're at it too. The True Moon section should just be Theodore, Cecil, Rosa, Kane, and Golbez. Heck, these characters, minus Kane, are critical to Cecil confronting his Dark Knight self in the story anyway. But I wouldn't be against a character select that would allow players to swap Edge and Rydia into the party at the endgame. Overall, Final Fantasy IV The After Years is a superfluous entry to the overall lore of the original game, meant to drum at the nostalgic heartstrings of those who loved this original entry. It does so, but honestly way too heavily handed, up to and including using the same environments, sprites, and music. Characters from the original game are either grown up or aged up, which is nice to see, but too many of these are added and playable, diluting and padding the game way too much. One nice thing about the original is that it can be started and completed in a clean 10-hour period. 6 hours now, especially on the newest Pixel Remaster. After Years needs some serious trimming to this effect, and removing superfluous characters like the 4 Evelyn ninjas would seriously help. Where the game succeeds, such as the additions to the battle system with the moon phase and band systems, are fantastic and need no change. A big shout out to Neroxis and his YouTube channel for his playthroughs of this game on the PSP. I recommend supporting his channel if you enjoy watching Final Fantasy playthroughs. I've got a few for the original 4th and 6th entries on my channel here, but he's got those and more on his. Now, are there any other changes that you would have liked to have seen for Final Fantasy IV The After Years? Let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate you watching my video content, but please like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications of new videos. It pleases Bahamut, the dragon god of YouTube algorithms. Thanks again, and have a great day.